Hi, I'm Nolan, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the flute on Black Sabbath's 1983 album, Born Again. On the back of the album, it says Tony Iommi Guitars, Guitar Effects, and Flute. But nowhere on the album is it easy to hear flute, so fans have wondered, well, where is it? Well, when asked about it, Tony couldn't remember. Thanks to the emergence of some custom Mellotron tapes that were recently discovered in an abandoned storage facility in Birmingham, England, we now can determine at least one place where the flute is played. Whether it made it onto the final mix is a different question, but at least it explains why flute was listed on the album credits. Now, if you're not familiar with what a Mellotron is, it is essentially an early form of sampling. It's a keyboard, it's not a synthesizer, but it instead uses tapes of sampled, pre-recorded material. Now, some of the more common tapes were strings, choir, flutes, but Sabbath had some custom tapes made for them. One of the set of tapes made for them included sound effects, for example, Bill Ward's anvil or metal plate that was struck and then dipped into water, and that was used on Stonehenge. These sound effect tapes were likely used so that Jeff Nichols could play the sounds in live performance without having to recreate all those sounds in real time. One of the tapes contains 2 brief flurries on the flute, which makes sense so Tony wouldn't have to play the flute live at concert. These 2 brief flurries sound like this. Here they are. The question is, in which song would this have been played? If you listen carefully to the sound immediately after the flute, you will hear something in the background. It seems studio monitors were playing while Tony recorded the flute part. I will play that bit, but with the volume turned up. You may recognize this vocal melody from the first verse of the title track, Born Again, second track on side 2.
Which is different from the vocal phrasing at 257, which is here. Compare again.
To see where in the phrase these 2 5-note flute flurries occur, I've lined them up so that the vocal parts match. I've placed the flute track completely in the right channel and the final mix in the left so that you can hear them separately and clearly. Make sure you're listening in stereo. I've also transcribed the 2 parts for those that read musical notation. You'll hear and see that these flurries are played as pickups to beats 1 and 2 of the phrase. You'll notice that the second flurry is a bit softer than the first, as if he backed away from the mic a bit. The second flurry also comes in a bit early, a 32nd note, or a fraction of a second early. Notice how it ends just barely before Bill's snare hit. Here it is again, but with the flute added to the final mix, both parts in both channels. And here's the mix as it appears on the release. The first flurry is barely audible, if at all, and the second is completely buried in the mix, if not muted entirely. Perhaps because it was behind the beat, or maybe they just wanted to not have flute in that part of the verse and save it for later in the first verse. Makes perfect sense. It's unlikely that the flute would have appeared only at this moment of the song. So what we can do is listen for these flurries on beats 1 and 2 in other phrases. The 2-chord pattern repeats every 8 beats, or 8.5 seconds. So what we can do is listen for them at about 52 seconds, a minute and 1, a minute and 10 seconds, for example. However, I'll tell you that it's much clearer at a minute 18, a minute 27, and a minute 45. So here is a minute 18. And here's 1 minute 27 seconds. And here's at 1 minute 45 seconds. in Tony's flute, so perhaps Jeff doubled that on a synthesizer, so what we're hearing is a mixture of flute and synth, or maybe the synth just replaced it entirely. It's possible that there are other places in the song that flute was used. For instance, at 5 minutes and 1 second in the song, there's a little melodic part in the right channel. It's pretty faint, but the higher notes, C and D, tend to stick out a bit more. It sounds more like a synth though, so if it is a flute, it certainly went through some effects. Regardless if the flute made it into the final mix, we know at some point in the recording process that the flute was used at the start of the first verse, thanks to those custom Mellotron tapes. On the subject of thanks, I'd like to thank Brian Triola for converting the Mellotron samples using his Nord keyboard. I'd like to thank the University of South Carolina Upstate for several grants to research Black Sabbath and their music. That has resulted in several papers in my book, Experiencing Black Sabbath, a Listener's Companion, which is available on Amazon and the likely sellers. So check it out if you'd like to learn more about Sabbath's music, anything from their first album to their most recent. So if you have any questions or comments, please email me anytime at nstolz@uscupstate.edu. That's nstolz@uscupstate.edu. Thanks for watching and hope to hear from you.